Be here. Thank you very much for coming. And I really, really appreciate it. I literally got off the plane, but love it, love it. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm here to talk about Night Flight to Paris. But I have to say, as I was coming here, I was getting really scared, because when my laptop went through, you know, TSA, I thought, are they going to do, check my search history? Because what would they find in my search history? Maybe explosives? Maybe Gestapo torture? I don't know, things like that. But they haven't. So, we have some little people here. So, anyway, this is the follow-up to 3 Hours in Paris, where we met Kate Reese, who grew up in Oregon, backwoods Oregon during the Depression. She had 5 brothers. She was the only girl, and her father taught her to shoot as soon as she could walk, because they would have to go and defend the ranch from predators. They had to, shoot deer for venison, all that. And so that is a skill that comes to her by second nature. But one thing she always missed was there was no girl part, because it was all men on the ranch. So her aunt lived in Medford and had a rooming house. And she had one of the pensioners in the rooming house was a French woman, World War I war brat. And so she was living there teaching French. And then when Kate came, she was teaching her French and showing her how to apply lipstick. And she just loved it, inspired this love of Paris. So Kate earned a scholarship to the Alliance Française to Paris, to the Sorbonne. So voila, 1937, she meets David, a brooding romantic Welshman, in the cafe. And it's 1937, it's the summer, maybe peace could happen. Europe was beautiful. They got married. Then the war started. They had a baby, Lisbeth. He was stationed up in the Orkney Islands. She was working in a munitions factory. And then the Luftwaffe came, and her husband and baby daughter were gone. She wanted revenge, and she had a skill that not many people had. And British Secret Service recruited her. Okay, so that's all the backstory you're getting, okay? But now it's 1942. And I would like to read something, if that's okay. Okay, so I have my glasses. This is good. Always good. So I'm just going to start. Hope I'm in frame here. So it's October 1942, somewhere in the English countryside. If you can't hear me, please let me know. The car pulled up on the pebbled roadside at the crossroads where a dairy truck was parked. A soldier opened the door for Kate. She'd been made up to look like a middle-aged woman fitted with false teeth to fill out her cheeks and a dark shoulder-length hairpiece. Her chest had been bound in a padded vest under a Red Cross uniform. The soldier escorted her across the dirt road and into the cramped, windowless rear of the requisitioned dairy truck. It smelled of sour milk. The Royal Army Forces driver, in a freshly pressed uniform, advised Kate to sit back and hold on. Little else she could do, squashed into a ledge by the milk bottle rack. Wasn't she supposed to be going on a mission? Where are you taking me? Confidential, I'm afraid, miss. Mrs. Reese. No names, please. No conversation. Sorry, missus, but that's orders. After a while, she must have closed her eyes and slept. The truck ground to a halt. Peering ahead, through the mud-splashed windshield, she could make out high stoned walls, damp with splotches of moss, and topped by twisted iron spikes. Her heart dropped. Prison. A medieval prison, stuck on what looked like the moors. Was this her destination? Her heart raced as the back doors opened. The driver took her things and assisted her as she stumbled out the back. Dawn broke in a warm golden glow. An Argus single-engine monoplane's wings glinted in the early morning on the rutted tarmac. The humming engine spit into a high rev. Someone shouted, "Hurry up!" She was sick of all this back and forth. Were they disorienting her on purpose? Or just plain scrounging for available transport? Were the Brits this desperate? Were they actually losing the war? A hand gestured from an open metal door. Incredulous, Kate realized the rutted road was the takeoff strip. They'd been waiting for her. Go, the driver shouted, and she was running, tossing her bag inside just as reaching arms pulled her onto the plane. She landed face down on a gunny sack of Royal Mail. She managed to right herself, spit out the grit on her tongue, and strapped on a harness. The tiny four-seater smelled of burned oil and damp wool as it bumped over the ruts in the road. The pilot pulled back the throttle, increasing the speed and sending her jostling on the mail. Open your mouth so your ears pop, the pilot shouted. We're about to trot. She didn't hear the rest. The road vanished. Out the cockpit window, she saw only gorse, pale purple heather, and rocks. The jagged rocks were coming toward them. Her stomach jumped. They were going down. Her scream was drowned in a bone-rattling shudder. The engine would catch fire and explode. She was going to die. The plane whined, complaining in the throes of a metallic shaking. The pilot cursed and wrestled with the throttle. Somehow, the bucking plane stabilized, heaving a last judder as if coming to after a spasm. The plane climbed, barely skimming the rocky crags, and headed toward the clouds. Her stomach plopped back where it belonged. She hoped she wouldn't be sick. The other two passengers were a man in an RAF uniform and a blindfolded figure wearing a flight suit, handcuffed to the seat. The engine's noise made it impossible to talk, not that she wanted to. Her thoughts drifted to her pa. He'd always told her to never forget who she was and where she came from. Stay proud, wasn't she? Guilt hit her. If only she'd been able to go home to take care of Pa. The war had prevented that. Now, rootless, she fought in a war across the ocean. If she ever made it back to Oregon, home wouldn't be the same without her pa or her brothers. The pilot half turned and handed her a thermos. If that didn't wake you up, this will. Pass it around, he grinned. It's restorative. Whiskey? This early? No wonder the plane got in trouble. She sniffed. Tea, the English answer to everything. She poured a stream into the tin cup chained to the lid and sipped. So steeped and full of tannin, it woke her up. All right, after spending half the day at Trent Park and the rest training with Stepney, her handler, she needed it. He'd said she'd be in France for 3 days max. One dirty weekend in Paris. Drop the penicillin, hit the target Margot directs you to, and extract her. She wiped the cup with the edge of her nurse's cape, passed it to the RAF man, a mumbled thanks. The slumped, blindfolded figure's ankles seemed to twitch. She couldn't make out much in the dark plane. A prisoner, that much she gathered, escorted from one prison to another, like she'd begun to feel. The prisoner's ankles continually twitched, and the manacled wrist joined in making a metallic clacking, shaking in fear or... The first rule in training was keep your mouth shut. This prisoner wasn't her business. The pressure in the cabin made her ears pop. Sometime later, a swath of landing strip appeared, bordered by dense forest. After the pilot's seat of the pants takeoff, who knew if he could land the damn thing? Her nerves vibrated with the plane, and she rubbed her neck, her skin moistened by perspiration. The RAF man's fingers drummed on the cabin's metal ribs. The steady beat of tuck, tuck, tuck put her more on edge. Below appeared an airfield control tower, resembling a child's stack of blocks. Lining the runway, faded khaki corrugated steel Nissen huts and men in dark Navy flight suits. A Royal Air Force clandestine site. The plane dropped altitude and so did her stomach. Any minute she'd be sick, but a quick plummet, a heavy thump, and the screeching of tires meant they'd landed, finally. Her throat caught as they bounced over the runway while the brake's force threw her back against the seat. Any minute, she feared this tin bucket would go crashing into the forest. A quick maneuver by the pilot pivoted the Argus into an open hangar. The plane shuddered to a halt. Bile rose in her throat. She had to get out. She unharnessed herself, grabbed her carryall, and climbed onto the concrete. The prisoner was hustled off and into a waiting transport truck. Another plane taxied to the front of the hangar. "We expect your cooperation," a man in overalls said. She took a deep breath. Kerosene odors and a soldering iron's acrid fumes. But thank God she stood on terra firma. Her stomach righted. He handed her a new satchel. A plane's motors whined. The Lancaster model. The kind used for landings in the French countryside. "Where's Stepney?" "Haven't the foggiest," he said. "But when's my updated brief? Plans changed. You'll need to get going." Sirens whelped, startling her. Changed how? Men in flight suits started running across the tarmac. An ominous droning filled the sky, getting louder. That familiar flutter of fear danced up her neck. She remembered the sound of the Luftwaffe's planes bombing the Orkney munitions factory. Her 2 co-passengers were gone. "The Luftwaffe's attacking, Sherlock," he said. "Time to hurry." With that, he whipped a blindfold around Kate's forehead. What in God's name had been the point of their first stop? And in the middle of an air attack. Within 2 minutes, she'd been strapped into the Lancaster. "Where are we going?" Only the whirring of the propellers. The next moment, she felt a sharp prick in her arm and a piercing coldness. That was the last thing she knew. But that's just the beginning. Because she lands in France, and hello, she came on our first trip to Paris, Laura Blue.
I won that trip.
You won that trip from Soho. Come on in.
Sorry,
Your hat, Jonathan.
Sorry we're late.
No problem. Okay.
Hi.
Thank you for coming. Yeah. So Kate lands in France, in Paris. She's got 3 missions. She's going to run into sheiks and spies and poets and partisans. And I got to use a lot of nuggets of history for this story. And it's really great. And when I was researching, I discovered so many things about what women did and these untold stories. You know, these stories that we don't know about. And since it's Women's History Month, yes, okay, it's really fitting that we talk about them. And I have to say, a lot of these women, there were thousands of women who helped in every kind of way, whether it was a munitions factory, whether learning Morse code, and they were working for signals intelligence. Their stories weren't told. So I have to say, you all know Kate Middleton, who might be the next Queen of England or someday. So Kate Middleton's grandmother was a coder at Bletchley Park. You've all heard of her at Turing, cracked the Enigma code and all that. But beside the famous men and brilliant mathematicians, Kate's grandmother worked there. They had all these women working. And of course, they were more mundane jobs. But if they had, they like to do crossword puzzles, they were good at math, they were always bringing, encouraging those women to do it. But they were called girls at Bletchley Park. They didn't get the same pay, and no records were kept. So somehow, and I don't know exactly when Kate Middleton was researched, she's quite proud of her grandmother, there was no file on her grandmother. And she asked why, because the girls didn't have files. They would never be working again. When the mom came home, they'd go back cooking and cleaning and all that. However, in signals intelligence, which is where women work, where it was run by the military intelligence, a lot of files were kept because it's the military, right? Anyway, so I found this incredible story about 2 sisters. So picture, if you will, 1939, people are called up. There were 2 young women who lived in the countryside, 18 and 19 years old. Their father went to serve, and they could too. They could be fannies, which is the female auxiliary something yeomanry, or WRENs or WAFs, or there's all these acronyms, I forget, Women's Auxiliary Air Force. They were helping in different capacities. So the two sisters went down and, got recruited, and they had to sign the Official Secrets Act. They could never say, where they were going or what they would be doing. And so they were sent to different places, and that was it. End of the war. They all came back. The father, the sisters, they all survived. And the father said, well, where did you, what were you doing? Oh, things, both of them said. Early, they got married, they had children, families, careers. Early 2000s, these files, the military, signals and intelligence files, were declassified. Okay? They found their files. And they found they both had been working for signals intelligence. Same branch, different continent. They had never spoken of this. So then they got to talk about what they did. One was stationed, in Greece, one was in Cairo. And so I got to use some of that for this wonderful character, Sasha, in this book, which I loved. I hope I distilled some of the spirit of these young, plucky women in Cairo, where it was just a nest of spies. I tell you, it was just amazing what was going on there. The British soldiers, maybe they were bus drivers in Liverpool or delivered coal. Here they were, young men in Cairo. It was hot. There was no blackout, no curfew. They had money. There were women. I mean, they were in heaven. And everyone was pretty naughty from whatever, from what you read about Cairo. And everyone was double crossing and all that. But and this was very much a time when Rommel was more than knocking on the door. I mean, he came within very close of Cairo. So, but there were a lot of stories in signals intelligence about how Rommel, the Desert Fox, knew about, the British defenses. And there was a leak, a big leak. But you'll have to read about that. But so that was great to use that in a real live event. I mean, these things really happened. And I have to say, I was very much influenced by a book I read. I think I was about the age of your son, Jack. It's The Key to Rebecca, which is a classic story. And the first line of The Key to Rebecca, it's on my computer. The last camel died at noon. Is that a great verse?
It's a great sentence.
And I don't know, I don't have my first line. Of course, it doesn't match that, but I've always thought about that. I mean, that's it. So I have to say there's some of that came in this story, and I hope you don't feel like you get sand under your fingernails or whatever when you read it. But actually, I hope you do, because I want you to get that feeling of being immersed. I also was in Cairo, and I was robbed at the train station. And this was before cell phones, so I had nothing. And I was panicked and scared, and I couldn't even read a street sign. I couldn't even tell where to go or what to do or how to do it. It's such a foreign culture. And actually, I made a friend, still friends to this day. And so I think I could bring some of that to what Kate experiences when she's in Cairo. So, but of course I can't tell you anymore because I have to kill you if you haven't. But so yeah, Kate has a lot of things to face, and especially I got to use the Hotel Lutetia in Paris, the super zillion starred hotel on the left bank across from the Bon Marché, just gorgeous. And this hotel had such a checkered past. It's where de Gaulle went on his honeymoon. And then, of course, the German military intelligence, the Abwehr, took it over because it was super beautiful. Took it over for their officers. And then after the war, it was a terminus for people coming from the camps. And de Gaulle opened the hotel, so when people were coming from the train stations and having them come and meet family. And that was, I talked about that in Murder in the Marais, my first book, Amy Leduc book. But there is such a storied history, and I really got to use that. And it was very hard doing research in Paris to find actual concrete things about, when the Germans had taken over this hotel. Except I did find a Christmas menu for German soldiers in 1942 held at the Hotel Lutetia. Yes, they were eating really well, considering everybody else was on rations. You know. So yeah. What else can I say about this? I think that the generation, that went through the war, they didn't talk about this, and for many reasons, and they just have that habit. But I think we're going to learn things as more and more files. It's 80 years now, right, since the end of the war. So we're going to learn more and more as files are declassified. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago when I went to Crime Fest in Bristol, 2019, I think, or 2018. It's a great crime festival in the UK. I was on a panel with other authors, younger women. Anyone's younger than me these days, but anyway. But they were writing historical fiction. And I thought that was so interesting. Historical fiction with crime, with secrets. And I thought, where did that come from? And we never got a chance to have a big chat, but I really wanted to find out, where did that come from? Is this your great grandmother? Did you find something, in a diary? Were these things, did she start talking about it? Did it, what kind of made them write about an era they're kind of removed from? And then I thought, we're all impacted by World War II. It had such an effect on us. It ripples down, whether we're conscious of it or not. I had family who served. I'm sure many of you do as well. Or, people who served. And so it's something that was huge in our history. Nothing, well, we have Ukraine now, but nothing so far. Global war everywhere, in Japan and Southeast Asia and Europe and everywhere, North Africa. So I think it's great that, and I love delving into that to learn what we can hopefully learn for now. We can learn something. So, yeah, and I think the young British female historians, yeah, I trying to, they're really into it, and they can go right to Kew Gardens. I have to, go online, but it's great. There's a whole generation exploring that, and I think that's wonderful. And we're just going to hear more stories, and I think it's really inspiring. Any comments or questions?
What got you involved in it? I mean, I know that you do a lot of research in the past, but when you started with the first book, which was such a departure from what you were doing, what was the impetus that got you into it? Was the story told to you or family members? Or?
Mm-hmm. Before I answer that, Laura, may I read this quote? I meant to read this great quote. We believe the one who has power. He is the one who gets to write the story. So when you study history, you must ask yourself, whose story am I missing? Whose voice was suppressed so that this voice could come forth? That is by Gyasi in Homegoing. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful quote. And Laura asked why, what happened? Well, funny you should ask, because it's these three guys that I found. I didn't know much about Hitler's visit to Paris. I saw this picture, and you could see this on YouTube. So there's Albert Speer, who's architect and armament minister. Arno Brecker, who's sculptor. And so he came to Paris. We can all see it. We know he was there. And he left after 3 hours. Never returned. And I'm not a, historian, but I'm like, what? Why? Dude, you could have had a parade down the Champs-Élysées. What was the reason? And I started thinking. And then after the war, Speer, they all survived, not him. And Speer wrote a book, and he talked about when they were there, and he said it was June 28th, 1940. Arno Brecker said, it was after he signed the armistice up in northern France, Belgium, in that train car, and came down June 23rd, 1940, which makes more sense that he would come to Paris. And also, if you watch that YouTube video, you see, I mean, the streets of Paris were deserted. Okay, everyone had fled. But you see a priest walking over the Champs-Élysées running. And I always said, it's first, it's Sunday morning, June 23rd, 1940. Why did these men tell different stories? Why did they have different dates? Why did this never get changed? Why didn't it get challenged? And the wheels spun, what if? I was like, there's something there. Just And so I was talking to my editor, Julia, at Soho, and she said, you know, you're kind of obsessed with that. So you take that footnote and start to think about a story. And she said, I know you have all those little notebooks that you have when you go to Paris, and things I put in there, usually about World War II that don't, sometimes they work in Amy book, often they don't, but I've got lots of them. She said, I know you have those notebooks. Why don't you write about that? So after 18 books in my Amy Leduc series, I was told to take, exercise some new muscles. And so my writing muscles got exercised. And I wrote 3 Hours in Paris. And I had to come up with a character of Kate Reese. I really enjoyed it after I got into it because Kate was American. I mean, full American. She was a big bone gal. She wasn't, petite and Parisienne or fashionable, So that made it harder for her to hide, to not stand out, which is what you really want to do. You can trust no one. You're not supposed to stand out. And so I wanted to just throw everything at her. And I threw a lot more at her in this book too. But so here's a woman with this incredible skill, sharpshooting. Okay, it's a natural. She has lost her daughter and her husband. She has nothing to lose. So she wants revenge. So that's kind of her MO. And trust is very hard for her. And so actually when I sent in Night Flight to Paris, my editor, Juliet, said, well, what's this story about, Cara? What's the theme? I go, She goes, it's about trust, Cara. I said, thank you. That's why I have an editor who tells me what the theme of my book is. And a very good one. But it's true. How can you trust people when you're an agent in a foreign country? You are disguised. You have a mission. You might have to kill people to succeed. You have to lie. You have to, do everyththing you can. You are not supposed to trust anyone because anyone can turn you in for multiple reasons. They could just not like your side. They could need money. They could, have revenge. There's many, many reasons. So anyway, that's what it's about. How can she ever trust again? And especially Philippe, who we've met in the other book. How can you have a relationship when you can't trust people? So that's a real issue for her in this book. Being a spy is tough in so many ways, but then not being able to trust anyone. How do you have a personal life? You don't. If you're on leave or, you don't know if you're going to live till tomorrow, you just don't know.
So you get the wheels in your head moving.
Have you known any spies, do you think?
Oh yeah. Yeah, but you don't, you're not supposed to know, right? You don't, a good spy is someone you just pass in the street. You just don't notice. That's being really good. It's not James Bond, it's not Mata Hari. It's none of that. You'd be caught out in a second.
Yeah.
But I did meet someone in Paris.
I had a friend who was a spy, and it was actually very difficult to have a relationship with her because she couldn't. Suddenly, she became a spy. Believe it or not, she was an astrologer before that. Really have a proper relationship with you because she couldn't tell you anything about her job. She couldn't talk about work. She could only tell you that she couldn't talk about work. She never said that's what she did, but I know she was at Langley and blah 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 and all that kind of stuff. So. In the end, we had to kind of not be friends anymore because it was impossible. And I met another person who'd been in the FBI many years later with a friend who was a friend of a friend. And I told him about it, and I said, I wonder if she maybe kind of stopped being my friend because it put your friends in danger. And he said, yes, that's actually very possible. So,
True. Well, we know George Fong at FBI, and we know he does more than that, but,
He doesn't like us, which is why he's our friend. He thinks he's our friend.
Exactly. He doesn't care what happens to you.
No, he's retired, but yeah, I mean, some of his stories of when he was undercover are unbelievable, where his family wouldn't know where he was for a couple of months and couldn't really talk to people about what he was doing. So yeah, I remember some of us, I think Oktoberfest one year, ended up going on a tour of the CIA, and one of the tour guides down in Langley, after we went over there, was talking about this relationship thing and said, yeah, a lot of people end up marrying and getting involved with other spies.
Yeah,
So,
I went to her wedding. I was her matron of honor, or maid of honor, and I was under strict instructions not to ask anyone what they did, which is kind of crazy because they must all have a story.
yeah.
what do you
But
do?
I wasn't allowed to. Yeah, well, that was the other thing. It was kind of weird. You couldn't ask any questions, and she married somebody else in the same profession. And one time I was there for the weekend, and a friend came for dinner, who was obviously in the same, and he assumed I was too. And he started to kind of talk in a different way, and they were kicked onto the table. So yeah, so it would be impossible to have a kind of. But is it something that you secretly kind of would have loved to have done? Maybe. I mean,
Who, me?
yes.
Well, I mean, when I'm in Paris, I feel that I'm incognito. You know, people don't really pay attention to me. I try to dress like, you know, nothing special, because I like to sneak in those doors. You know, Laura, we sneak in those doors, go see what's in the courtyard, you know, do little things. I like to be a fly on the wall. I like to observe,
Yeah.
you know, and I know I'm an outsider in Paris. I'm not French, but I want to see what people do. I want to see how the light falls. I want to see how people go, and you know, where they go after when they get out of the metro, and which cafe do they have their apéro, and what does that mean, you know, and you know, what's the neighborhood pulse. So I like to look at it maybe from a, you know, what do you call it, casing the joint kind of mode, kind of casing. But it's fun because you want to know what it's like. As a spy, I think the minute they started to torture me, I would tell them everything.
Me too.
I mean, I can't keep up. Okay, what do you want to know?
Can't keep it secret.
I can't keep a secret. I can keep some secrets, but not if I was tortured. I mean, right away, just forget it.
How do you get inside a character that's so different from you?
Well,
Research, is it?
I think it's lots of things. You know, I was the kid in school where looking out the window, the daydreamer, you know. But I think it's, you know, it's about telling a story, getting into the skin, like an actor. I'm not an actress, but, you know, actors, I read a lot about actors who, they go on stage, what they need to do. They need to inhabit that skin. And then you can pull in your, the universal themes of, you know, panic or love or fear or apprehension, you know. I think an actor does that. I remember reading about Sir Laurence Olivier, right, famous, lauded, Oscar, all those award-winning, and every night before he would perform on the stage, he felt like he was going to throw up. And someone said, "Well, how can you, of all people, have that in your stomach?" He said, "Well, every night's the first night. You know, really." You've got to get out. You've got to perform, even if you've done this play, 200 shows a night or whatever. But you got to find that thing inside that brings that character. I mean, I think it would be terrifying to be an actor in Broadway and to have to summon that every evening. I mean, that's what they do, and they love that, and they're very good at it. But you've got to summon that from wherever you get it, you know, and interpret whatever the playwright wrote, or, you know, where they came from. So, I mean, I think we all do that. I think, you know, you all lie. And I know some of you lie more than others, and I'm looking at you. I'm the best man at my wedding, but yes. Because we lie because we want to save face. We want to do the lie that doesn't hurt someone's feelings. We lie like when you're 16 years old and you come back from outside smelling of smoke. "No, Mom, I wasn't smoking." You know, whatever is your lie. And, you know, I didn't mean to be late, but I was, so we all lie. I mean, we play parts when we go, if we have an interview, whatever. So I think, it's fun, to do it on the page, not in person.
Getting back to the two spies you met in Paris,
Mhm.
did you meet them while you were researching the books, or at a different time? And how did you know they were spies?
Well, one of them, it's all about introductions,
Okay.
in France especially. You got to be introduced and
Mhm.
introduced, and someone tells you. My good friend's dentist sister-in-law, knew something, that kind of, but once you're introduced, you have your in. And he was with the Renseignements Généraux, kind of like our FBI, kind of with sweeping domestic powers. And I knew, I was told he was that. And I was writing about the 13th arrondissement, which had a Chinatown, and he worked in the Chinese section, so he could tell. No, actually, no. And then he told me about Belleville, which also has a huge Chinese population, and about the different kinds of Chinese. And then he helped me with murder, the one in the Upper Murray. Anyway, he helped me lots of times about the different segments of Chinese. So he was okay because he was telling me, things I should know. And I said, of course, I will never, I couldn't put his name in there. I just had to generally take what he was telling me. And of course I said, it's all fiction. So it was different. I mean, they wanted to help. He wanted to, as long as he had nothing to do with it. And then the other one I met, it was last year actually, took me for coffee. And it was through a contact we have with George Fong here, George Fong, who got me. And he told me, I'm just an FBI, liaison. No, they're not. In Paris, they are not just FBI liaisons. And he said, I can tell you this, I can tell you that, I can't tell you a lot. And I said, would this happen? He said, I can tell you if that's plausible. And I just got some good stuff. So it's like that. I mean, they do want to help writers. And I mean, many writers have, people who, law enforcement, undercover who tell you, even retired CIA people can write books now. So
Yeah, most of the time they want to help writers when they're open house, never hurts to ask,
right. Yeah, and they say no. Oh, and I found a great explosives guy on an FBI chat alert. He was so good. He goes, he had so much experience. I mean, he was like amazing. He'd been all over the world. And he goes, what do you want? I said, what do you mean? What kind of explosion? You want this kind? You want that kind? And I'm going, okay, well, I don't know what I want. He goes, can I suggest? And he just worked out the whole scenario.
Wow.
Of course, and then he said, now you can't put everything in or people would use that.
Yeah.
But it was Murder at the Port of Versailles. That's right, for the explosive.
Right.
Wow.
He was like on it. He said, no, you want that one. You want the industrial. No, you want this one. You want that one. He was great. And he goes, oh, and him a book too. But yeah, you always have to send him a book after that. So it's not so, secret. I mean, it is secret, but basically you want something plausible that people would buy. And I like writing in the historical vein because it must be hard to write now with, modern day when you have drones and street cameras and cell phones, and how do you block them? You know what I mean? I mean, in the old days, you just have the drop pass. You're walking by and you just slip it in the pocket or you put it under a book. Actually, I did meet. Oh, wow! I met a Dutch spy who was the son-in-law of Leighton Gage, a Soho author, who told. I don't think he's a spy anymore, but he said, "I never use a cell phone. I never use a laptop when I'm making contact with my people, my agent, my operatives. It's the drop pass. I put a thing in a thing, and we walk by. Never. Or we meet, and then we meet in a church or something. They go to the old-fashioned ways, so, because anything you do leaves a trace, electronic trace.
As anyone who has an Alexa will know.
Yes.
Do we have time for one more question?
I was gonna ask about what you mentioned at the start, just your anxiety about, oh, I'm writing a thriller now. And, you know, the research it takes to get into that historically, and then think about a different kind of writing after 18 books. Talk a bit about that and when, you know, how far along are you when you're thinking, okay, this is working, I can do this?
Once I got the character of Kate, that really, I really scrambled, and I remember talking with my editor about it. At first I thought she would come from Montana, because she'd be an outdoor girl, and she'd have this and that. And I was on book tour in Oregon, and stayed with a friend who works at the Historical Society, and she said, I said, I'm having trouble, you know, and she goes, oh, okay, well, have you been to Montana? I went, no. Well, there's your problem.
Mm-hmm.
You've been to Oregon a lot of times. I have a lot of oral histories of the descendants of the frontier women, you know, the frontiers that came over, right?
Mhm.
And, you know, covered wagons and, you know, farmed and, you know, really strong women, and a lot of their descendants, they still live there. So you should listen to those. And once I heard that, I know Oregon a little bit, I'm like, yeah, this works. Well, what'd she do? And then I thought, well, she could, you know, once I started to flesh her out,
Yeah,
put her in this place, in this ranch, hunting wolves, which you get $25, bounty hunter in that time, because that was a lot of money then. They were at the southern Oregon, northern California border. $25 was a lot of money during the Depression. And so once I started to look at that and see it and what she would have done, then it all started coming together, and where she would be. And so yeah, but I did feel that I was being unfaithful to Amy.
Well, Amy resurfaced.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I felt I was being unfaithful, but I think she forgave me. Sorry.
Were you making
She needed
notes
a
for
break.
May stories on the side?
Yeah, always. Yeah, because I had to write the next book, so I had to, you know, where is she going? So yeah, so yes, she's fine with it now. She's fine, but yeah, it's really different, you know. But it's fun, and I liked having a fast. I love reading thrillers. I mean, I like to read everything, but I like thrillers once in a while. I just want to go, and I want to go somewhere else, and I want to, you know, stay up all night. That's what I want, and I hope you will. But I like that, and how do you do that? Well, you have some Nazis chasing you. That's always a good, you know,
Yeah.
36 hours needs to be done, you know, because what's his name? The Fuhrer wanted him to find her in 36 hours. So that's pretty big impetus. She's got the Gestapo after her and all that, but it's also, it gives you a way to introduce the other point of view characters, because everybody has a role to play. And I like going into what would a German man who did not necessarily like the Fuhrer but had that job, had a family, what if he did things that he had to do? So I got to explore to have a German, I hope, written as a person, you know,
Mm-hmm.
okay, on the other side. So, you know, and I really wanted to do that because, I don't know, I think it's important that nothing is black and white. Good people do bad things and bad people do good things. So that's sort of where it came from. And once I get it, you know, then I got into it, you know. And then of course Amy's next foray, next year. Okay, so now that, since we have someone from Soho in the house, I need to ask you people a question, and you can vote. So the tentative title for Amy's next investigation in the 19th arrondissement, tentative title, tell me what you think, Murder on the Canal.
Maybe we could go no. The topography?
Is it Canal Saint-Martin or something else?
Close. What about, second choice, Murder at La Villette?
Mm.
Specific
I
is
like
better.
that one, sounds better.
Yeah.
Sounds, second one
Better.
sounds better, it sounds like.
I don't
First
know,
one
it
sounds
sounds
like
prettier
Christie.
and grosser, and one sounds a little more.
The first sounds a bit Agatha
Fluffier.
Christie.
And
But it could be Amsterdam, right?
That's
Yeah.
when I think canal.
But
But
she
she
named
named
the
the canal. Yeah.
Okay, Rudy, Murder at La Villette. The crowd.
Get back to staff meeting tomorrow.
But everywhere I've asked this question, everyone likes La Villette.
We had a
Well, it
we
seems
had
to
a
follow
meal,
with it.
we walked up the canal with you and had a meal somewhere up there for that trip that we went
Yeah.
on.
It's a little further on. It's a little up from Canal Saint-Martin where it opens at Stalingrad, opens to La Villette, it opens to, Bassin de La Villette, going up the 19th. Like that. Okay, good, thank you. Thank you all.
Feel like I'm here for a moment.
All right. Thank